Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke bringing you our course breakdown for this week's Charles Schwab Challenge. We're back to Colonial Country Club, an iconic venue here on the PGA Tour that we know really well. We've seen it for decades at this stage, and gonna bring you what you need for your PGA DFS picks, and of course to go out there and take a few outrights. We'll go through a hole-by-hole breakdown, some of the key stats and comp courses you should keep an eye on to go out there, make a few models, and cash out for this week. I know it's not a major, right? No PGA championship, but still a much stronger than average field and plenty of top end talent out there to boot. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get this thing started. Over in Fort Worth, Texas, we've got ourselves a par 70 measuring just 7,209 yards. So just right over 7,200 yards, nothing to worry about from the distance perspective. But what's held up here is the design. You're talking about a well thought out design where angles off the tee are paramount, very similar to a Pete Dye type of design. You're looking at a strategic golf course. They've got small greens. They're just 5,000 square foot, relatively narrow fairways that are just 28 yards wide, putting a huge premium on that ball striking. And then also green complexes that are extremely penal. You've got a lot of undulation on them because it's in Texas over there in Fort Worth. It plays firm and fast most years, which leads to hard putting, extremely difficult around the green shots, and an extremely well-rounded test. That's why you've seen winners that are bombers here before, guys that go out there bomb and gouge this place to death like a Jason Kokrak. And then on the other end, you've got a lot of plotters. A lot of the shorter hitters on tour have been extremely successful here. That would be the Kevin Kisners, the Justin Roses of the world. So you'll ask players what kind of skill set will play around Colonial, and a lot of them will say it's pretty much any skill set, right? Whoever has their best game can go out there and get themselves into the winner's circle. So when we're looking at some of the stats, maybe it's a little bit less of an iconic week, a little bit less of a skewed week like we had last week at the PGA, where clearly it was an off the tee test, right? I mean, just look at that. Bombers galore at the top of the leaderboard. This time around, we've got to look at everyone, right? There's not just that 10 to 15% of the field that can get to that top end upside. So I think that's worth noting here at Colonial Country Club. But a few other things, we've got bent grass greens, same surface as last week at the PGA. So make sure you're looking at those for your putting stats. We've got Bermuda grass fairways, also Bermuda grass rough. It's a 3-inch Bermuda grass rough, which can tend to be relatively penal, especially if it gets a little bit wet, which we'll just talk about the weather now, right? The weather in the area has been wet for the last week or so. It's expected to be extremely stormy on the area on Wednesday, perhaps sometime there towards the start of the weekend. Might even get a few more thunderstorms that go through. And unlike last year, I don't think we're going to get that firm, fast, fiery version of Colonial that can cause players problems. You've seen guys eject. You've seen it be extremely difficult on and around the greens like I was talking about before. But if it's a little bit more receptive, if the greens are going to be a little bit slower this time around with some of the rain that they're getting, well, it's not going to be so difficult on the greens. It's not going to be so difficult around the greens. And you're also going to be able to throw in darts with your irons. So it would change the course. I would slightly favor the more aggressive players. I think iron play would become even more important in that kind of scenario. But until that happens, right, I don't want to overreact at this point. So we'll go through the golf course. We'll talk about how it typically plays, but understand that weather could play a huge factor this week. It could also, play next to no factor, right? If that storm doesn't come through on Wednesday, it could still play baked out there Thursday, Friday, right? They've had time to firm this golf course out over the last 4 to 5 days. So just keep an eye on that and understand that a lot of things could change if that indeed is the case. In terms of stats, scoring average was 0.72 over par last year. So just a little bit better than 3/4 of a stroke over par. And your greens and fairways were slightly harder than your tour average to hit. So in terms of your driving accuracy, it was a 62.2% rate, which is 3.7% lower than your tour average. So like I said, just slightly harder to hit than normal. And that's just with 28-yard fairways in terms of their width. That's lower than usual. I'd say your average is right around 35 yards wide. So with small targets, they did a pretty good job at hitting the fairways, right? It was firm and fast out there. That just shows you how much players were clubbing down off the tee, taking driving iron, perhaps taking 3-wood off the tee, where you're going to have slightly tighter dispersion patterns, and expect to see the same kind of thing this year, but maybe even more so pronounced if you do get the wet conditions, if you do get that storm that comes through on Wednesday. Might help players hit a few more fairways. In terms of your green and regulation percentage, that was 62.9% last year, which was 5.3% lower than your tour average. So a little bit more separation there compared to what you're seeing most weeks on tour. A lot of that is because of the size of the greens, where they were 5,000 square foot, and they still are this year, right? No changes to the course, but also with firm and fast conditions, that's just going to shrink those greens even more so. So it's not a long course. You're not hitting a bunch of long irons, maybe outside of the par threes, which can get a little bit lengthy. We'll go hole by hole, show you that here in a second. But your green and regulation average was maybe better than you'd expect, right? Particularly with firm, fast, crunchy greens out there last year. Only 5% lower than your average week is going to be even better this year, right? If they get that rain there on Wednesday, if they get the added moisture there towards the beginning of the weekend, I could see upwards of a 66, 67% green and regulation rate as an average for the field, let alone the players in contention that are playing well with their ball striking, could be hitting 14, 15 greens per round. So like I said, the weather could have a massive impact on the course. If we get that rain, I'd expect the scoring average to be closer to even par than about 3/4 of a stroke over par like we saw last year. And once again, the fairway and green regulation averages to follow suit as well. Now let's take a look at this thing hole by hole, bring you some of the shots these players are facing. So hole 1, you get an opportunity right off the bat. 563-yard par 5. It's going to dogleg from left to right off the tee. Your second shot, you can either lay up in this little landing zone right here or go forward into. Most players, especially if you hit the fairway, will be going for this green in 2. It's a small surface, but once again, should at the very least be a birdie look on hole 1, and likely a scoring opportunity. Hole 2 is 386, slight dogleg from left to right. Don't get used to that, right? I know holes 1 and 2 are doglegs from left to right, but a majority of the difficult holes around Colonial are going to move in the right to left direction. So you'll hear some players that talk about having that ball flight, as being an advantage out there, but holes 1 and 2 wouldn't reflect that. Hole 3, it's a dogleg from right to left, and this is your most difficult hole right out of the beginning stretch. In fact, 3, 4, and 5 are called the horrible horseshoe, some of the more difficult holes on property, and this favors that draw ball flight, right? That right to left little draw you can hit around the corner, and is why so many players talk about this. The difficult holes favor that kind of ball flight. The easy holes, where it doesn't really matter your ball flight because you're just trying to set up a wedge anyways, are the ones that go in the opposite direction. Hole number 4 is 247, long par 3. We get up closer to the surface. You can see it's not very, deep, right? It doesn't have that much depth to it. So a difficult little approach shot. Hole 5, the end of the horrible horseshoe, another long par 4, dogleg from the right to the left. Hole 6 is a scoreable opportunity. So first 2 holes, not so bad. Horrible horseshoe, and then you're back to some scoreable holes. You hit a little driving iron, maybe a 3-wood off the tee here, and you have a wedge in. Hole 7, another shorter par 4. It's just 431. So a little bit more lengthy, but still probably a driver wedge for most players. Hole 8 is 200 yards, another lengthy par 3. So the par 3s are among the most difficult holes on property. One of them is part of the horrible horseshoe. And then you've got the horrible horseshoe holes. And that's really about it. I mean, the rest of the course is scoreable, right? You hit the fairway here with another driving iron, maybe a 3-wood, and you've got a wedge in. Hole 10, same thing. 404 yards. I'm not going to bore you to death here. This is a forced layup, by the way, with the fairway that was removed. Another wedge shot in. 11's your last par 5. This is only reachable by maybe Rory McIlroy, Scotty Scheffler type of players, but 630 yards, so most players laying up. 441, dogleg from right to left for hole number 12. Another driver wedge for most of the field, and, maybe it's a 9-iron for some of the shorter players off the tee, but still just another birdie look for most players. Hole 13 is sub 200 yards, but it's got water in play the entire way, so a difficult par 3. Hole 14, mid-length par 4. This is a difficult tee shot, another one that favors that draw ball flight. So get it in the short stuff. It's another wedge in. At the very worst, right, it's a real easy par. Hole 15 is 425, little dogleg from left to right. Another short par 4. Hole 16, 192. It's your last par 3. The water in play, it's only really there for a front pin location, but still tricky. Not a very large green complex. Hole 17, 380. Little driver wedge, maybe even 3-wood wedge out there. Another straightforward birdie look. And then 18, you're finishing on another birdie look. This tee shot slightly contours from right to left. And once again, if you hit the fairway, you're looking at another 10 to 15 foot birdie look for most players. Now that we've seen the course, what stats am I looking at in my models and for my top plays this week? Well, number one, we've got shots gained approach, right? Real big surprise out there for those of you that are watching. Just kidding, of course, but approach play, what we want to focus on this week is the shorter ranges, right? That 100 to 125 yard range. You're going to see a whole bunch this week. That 125 to 150 yard range. So perhaps your pitching wedge for a lot of these players. You're going to see that overutilized this week. Trying to take a look at who can score on those short to mid-length par 4s is going to be the key differentiator. It's why almost any player can win around this track. You have the bomb and gouge strategy, right? A bunch of wedges into greens. You can have the more precise approach, right? Where guys are taking a lot of 3-woods off the tee and are just really dialed in from that 125 to 150 yard range. Either strategy can get the job done. You have to be good in one of those two ranges. So if you're a Tom Hoagie of the world, that is one of the better short iron players on tour. You're going to have a huge leg up in my models. If you're somebody like a Morikawa that is deadly from that range, so on and so forth, that is going to be a real easy way, right, to move up the leaderboard. Just hit it to 5-10 feet. Obviously, you have to go out there and capitalize on those birdie looks, which is why shots gained putting on bent grass is there at number 2. So approach play is important. I think specifically those wedges, but putting probably even more so important. I mean, if you look at the winners around here, it's been a lot of the more consistent, prominent bent grass putters. You have to go out there, score when you have the opportunities, because this is a difficult track when you're out of position. You're going to make bogeys pretty much every single round. Bogey-free rounds are extremely uncommon around Colonial. So taking advantage of the opportunities when you're presented them is key. I mean, we went through the golf course. I made it look real simple, but you've got to hit those fairways. And the fact of the matter is they're only 28 yards wide and they're real difficult to hit. So I mean, off the tee play, well, we're going to talk about that here in a second. It's definitely an accuracy over a distance type of track, but you're not going to be on position on every single hole. So whether it's cashing in for birdies, to make up for some of those bogeys, or trying to keep the bogeys off the scorecard, you've seen a huge correlation at this track between putting and success. So looking for some of the better long-term bent grass putters to try and take advantage of the situations. Lastly, we've got shots gained at short courses, which is, of course, just a little filter you can use in your shots gained database. This is a shorter track, a lot of laying up off the tee. A lot of the players that have had success at Sedgefield have had success at Colonial Country Club, Austin Country Club, the home of the WGC match play, have all had a ton of success over here at this event as well. So we'll talk about those as comps here in a second, all 3 of those tracks in fact, but not just those tracks, pretty much all short tracks on the PGA Tour. There's an art form to go out there and take those down. I want the players that have shown that ability in the past. A few other key stats, driving accuracy. And last year, driving accuracy was even more important because of how firm and fast the conditions were. Players were able to hit the short stuff, get an extra 30, 40 yards of roll, which will help the Kevin Kisners, Justin Roses, Matt Kuchar types of the world, right? The guys that are going to hit the short stuff and can rely on that sort of extra rollout. This year, because of the rain they may get there on Wednesday, I'm not so sure they're going to get that same sort of advantage. So that's why I have a accuracy a little bit lower than last year. I mean, driving accuracy, I believe, was my number 2 key stat last year. It's down at number 4 this time around. A lot of it has to do with the unknowns with the weather. If we get a lot of rain, accuracies might go down to number 5, maybe number 6 on my model. And driving distance rather than accuracy is going to go way up. Perhaps might even crack the top 3 in terms of my weighting. If it becomes a little bit more wet than usual, you're not going to get that same sort of rollout. And being able to fly the ball a long distance, take some of those bunkers out of play, kind of like Jason Kokrak was able to do a few years ago, could be the optimal strategy there. So that's why we're not talking that much about off the tee play here, is that there is a huge unknown with the weather to worry about. But historically, it has been an accuracy over a distance type of track. But once again, the weather could have a little bit of something to say about that. Looking at par 4 scoring, particularly that par 4 scoring from 400 to 450 yards, there's just a ton of holes around this track in that range. And also trying to take a look at a few of the, we call them quote unquote classical designs, shots gained classical designs. You're talking about older tracks that are all about, positioning off the tee, strategy play. There's also an art form for playing those sort of golf courses. So using that sort of filter in my database to go out there and identify some of our top plays. The comp courses for Colonial are extremely correlated. In fact, the crossover leaderboards for these events have been uncanny over the last 4 or 5 years. So at number 1, we've got Austin Country Club. So that's the home of the match play they have over there in Austin, Texas. It's another Texas track, right, which I think helps with some of the crossover, particularly with the visual and some of the firm and fastness that you get at both tracks. But if you look at the leaderboards, it's been an insane amount of crossover, right? Whether it's Scotty Scheffler, right, going out there having success at both tracks, was your runner-up last year to Sam Burns in a playoff. Whether it's guys like Kevin Kisner that have had so much crossover success, guys like Justin Rose that have also had success at that track. Billy Horschel's had success at both golf courses. Just go down the list. I mean, it's crazy how much crossover there is. So similar strategy off the tee, right? It's another one of those Parkland-style Texas courses. Tends to run firm and fast most years, and you definitely want to consider that for some of your modeling. The downside is that you don't have a bunch of shots gained, right? So we can't pull shots gained from it. We can't do a lot of our advanced analytics that we typically would for most of these comp courses. But if you're looking at the leaderboards, if you're trying to get a feel for what kind of players can get around that kind of track, I think that's a really good place to start. Next up, we've got Harbortown Golf Links, the home of this year's RBC Heritage, which was an elevated field this time around. In the past, a field that's much closer to the Charles Schwab Challenge in terms of strength. So if you look at some of the crossover success, once again, a lot of crossover, more of the plotter type that gets it done at both tracks. Matt Kuchar, a player that has had success both at Austin Country Club and Harbortown Golf Links, I think is a really good fit for this kind of course too. So he would kind of be like the poster child over those first 2 comp courses, but there's even more crossover down the list as you go. And finally, we've got Waialae Country Club, the home of the Sony Open, another short positional track where you're going to have a lot of doglegs from right to left off the tee, particularly towards the back 9 of that course that are eerily similar to some of the doglegs you get here at Colonial. The hard stretch is towards the beginning of this course, right? The Horrible Horseshoe, holes 3 to 5. It's the last few holes over there at Waialae. So there's some parallels to be made, very similar skill set for success. You're looking for some of those wedge players to take advantage of the easy holes. And then once again, that right to left ball flight for the difficult driving holes. So I like the crossover there. Once again, just crossover galore when you look at some of the leaderboards. But outside of that, like I said, shots gained at short courses, I think is something you can look at. Texas golf is another way to filter some of your results too. A lot of guys that have had success at Valero, they've had success at Austin, at this course. Byron Nelson, even over the last few years, have had success at all of these different kind of tracks. So whether it's the wind coming into play, whether it's the similar kind of firm and fast nature that these courses tend to have, I think that that's something you could perhaps look at for some of your modeling too. That's all for this week's course breakdown. Hopefully you feel a little bit more prepared to go out there, make some bets, some of your DFS picks. But before you hopping out of here, I need 2 things from you. First off, smash that like button before you get out of here. But also, I need to know what you think the winning score is going to be this week. With the chances of rain a couple times throughout the golf tournament, I'm going to go ahead and take minus 16. So definitely a better winning score than we're used to seeing around this track, but would love to hear your guys' thoughts down below. And of course, like I said, go ahead and smash that like button too. We'll have our DFS projections dropping on a little bit later this evening on my Patreon. We'll also have our core plays dropping on here on YouTube sometime tonight. So make sure to keep an eye out for those if you haven't already. Really looking forward to this event. I know it's not an elevated field. I know it's not the Masters PGA Championship, but we've still got high quality golf on a high quality venue and DFS contest, some outright bets that are calling our names this week. So looking forward to it. Keep an eye for all that content and best of luck with those bets and with those DFS lineups.